Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I'm going to teach you something about crime statistics because I think it is important to arm you with the knowledge in order to confront the data that is currently being promulgated by the mainstream media and the left-wing online media. Because if you guys haven't heard, there is a report that is widely cited about how among 54 of 69 quote-unquote major cities in this country, we have actually seen a drop in crime. And it's important for you guys to understand what that means. It's important for you guys to understand the context of the drop, as in what we're dropping from, because saying crime is down is one thing, but what you need to know is down compared to what in order for you to assess the overall issue. However, that being said, for all the people who are like, in your face, Sean, crime go down, that's a good thing, and I welcome a drop in crime in any of the categories, in any of the places, because I am of the belief that crime is bad, it's actually bad, and we should hold criminals accountable. So no, I wouldn't be upset about crime dropping, or any category of crime dropping, anywhere in this country. Again, it is something to be celebrated, and we should all get on the same page on this particular issue. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everyone who supports this channel via actualjusticeword.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Newly released data from major U.S. cities shows a sharp decline in violent crime in the first half of this year. That's great for American citizens, but maybe not so great for former President Trump, who's repeatedly tried to tie Democrats to high crime.
Now, I could have selected almost any left-wing media outlet to discuss how they're covering this segment, but I chose The Hill Rising because Robbie actually pushes back a little bit against Jessica Burbank, and I find it hilarious that Jessica is talking about a crime decline and how the statistics suddenly are important to her when she was one of the big proponents of denying the crime spike that preceded this crime decline. Now, Burbank says, and I believe I actually misspoke in the open, that the decline is in 54 of 69 major cities in the United States of America, but to be clear, that's actually not the case. The decline is, according to the reporting, from 54 of 69 law enforcement agencies, not cities, because more than one law enforcement agency can cover an individual city and or county, so let us just be clear about that. It's not really the most important thing to break down because a lot of these departments do cover a city, but to be as accurate as possible, we're talking about 54 of 69 law enforcement agencies, not cities.
54 of the 69 major cities saw drops in violent crime, with Columbus, Ohio, seeing the largest drop at 41% so far in 2024. Washington, D.C. and Miami saw a 29% drop, while Austin had a 28% decline, and New Orleans declined 26%.
More importantly, we should also talk about these four major crime categories, which are as follows: murder and homicide, we have robbery, we have rape and sexual assault, and we have aggravated assault. These are the things that are being measured, and all of these categories are not equal in their level of prevalence in our society. And by the way, they're not equal in the level of spike post the Black Lives Matter riots. So we measure them on different scales, because while homicide jumped nationwide 30%, the largest year-over-year increase during the Black Lives Matter riots period, assault and rape and robbery actually did not spike as much, so we gotta actually compare them to their previous levels from before. We also have to take into account that aggravated assault represents a huge disproportionate portion of the four major category data, which means that some places could actually see spikes in murder, rape, and robbery, but if they have enough of a decline in aggravated assault, they would be reporting crime being down in the four major categories. And by the way, this should be made obvious by the data set itself, which I have and I will put up on screen for you, just by the numbers in each of the categories. So this is the breakdown of the four categories of all the cities in this survey combined. And as you can see, homicide for 2024, and again, this is the first half of 2024 compared to the first half of 2023, is down to 3,124 reported reported incidents from 3,783 reported incidents. Rape is down to 13,064 reported incidents from 14,472. Robbery down to 45,575 from 2023's first half total of 48,529. And aggravated assault is down to 134,293 from 141,944. Now you can see right there just from the numbers, if you were to combine the major categories except for aggravated assault, they would not equal half the number of aggravated assaults in either year in this country, because aggravated assaults happen more often than these other crimes. And in fact, when you look at this data set, which is in alphabetical order, and on this study page is actually spread out over 3 pages, again, it will be linked in full in the description, you can see that the increases are noted in red, and a bunch of these places have big declines in assault, but increases in these other categories. And by the way, you can actually see for yourself on this chart that a lot of the places in this group that have seen crime declines have declines in assault, but actually have increases in other serious categories. In fact, there are about 20 cities in this particular subgroup that have seen an increase in rape, which is a very serious crime. But again, a lot of them are actually counted in the categories of cities where crime is down due to the fact that their assault numbers are just down overall in comparison. And since there's so many more assaults, that's why we see an overall decline in crimes being reported by this department. And again, that's not to say that this isn't good news. If so many more people are victimized by assaults, it is a positive that there's less of them, but it's important for you to understand the context. Now, by the way, the inverse can also be true. You can have a city with 3 of the 4 major categories with crime down significantly, but assault being even slightly up can end up skewing the numbers if we're grouping all of these as incidents without explaining or highlighting the fact that certain crimes are definitely worse than others. And a perfect example of this is the city of Boston, which is not in the highest decline of crime, despite the fact that they have significant drops in 3 of the 4 major categories, especially murder. In 2024, over this first half of the year, they saw 4 homicides. That is in comparison to 18 in the previous year. That's absolutely amazing. That is stellar work by the Boston PD, and we should give them credit where credit is due. We also have rapes dropping down to 81 from 95 in the previous year. Robbery down to 387 from 399 in the previous year. Again, all good stuff. But assault is up only by a couple of incidents, which is now 1205 from 1,194 in the same period of time from the previous year. So because we're dealing with such small numbers in the city of Boston, rather than being one of the most improved cities, Boston is somewhere in and around the average in terms of its previous drop. Now, I'd also be remiss if I didn't give myself credit for cities that I choose to highlight on this channel, because one of the things that you'll notice is that a bunch of the departments being surveyed are not talked about by people like me, because these are places that didn't have significant crime increases in the first place. They're not major cities, and there isn't a clear policy reason for why there was an increase. But a perfect example of a city that I'll often highlight is the city of Chicago, which, by the way, did see a drop down in terms of homicides, so give them credit. They also saw a drop in terms of reported rapes, again, credit where credit is due, but they had a slight increase in robberies and a significant increase in aggravated assault, which, again, one of the crimes that we cover a lot in the city of Chicago is their elevated robberies, which, again, it's only slight from 2023, but it was up in 2023. And of course, the assaults. So people talking about Chicago and the crime increase there, according to this report, are absolutely correct to do so, because they're up in the 4 major categories, again, heavily leaned on by the assault category, and robberies are also up. Now look, I encourage everyone to go to the link in the description of this video under where it says sources and examine the data for yourself. I want you to look over the names of the cities that are listed here and decide for yourself whether or not the category category, the vague nebulous term major city, is actually applicable to a whole bunch of them. I happen to believe that the reason why we're constantly looking at preliminary data midway through the year and why we're doing vague nebulous terms like major cities with a bunch of them that I believe are anything but major cities is to pad the numbers. But you could take solace in the fact that in some of these major cities, even the ones that I've highlighted, like New Orleans, we have seen a drop in crime. But there is a specific city that I want to highlight because I think it exemplifies my other point, which is if we're measuring a percentage of a drop, we should really think about what we're comparing that percentage of a drop to. And that, of course, is our nation's capital, the District of Columbia, which, by the way, is argued about between Jessica and Robbie.
Washington, D.C. and Miami saw a 29% drop.
So D.C., according to this reporting, according to a lot of articles, is one of the big winners here. It had a major drop. They're a major city. Undeniably, they're our nation's capital. And it's just undeniable that they're doing way better, and the numbers prove it out. So everybody who complained about the crime spike in D.C. needs to shut your face.
And not everywhere is equal. Like the city we live in, for instance, that I live in, that maybe you'll live in someday too. Washington, D.C. had extremely high had an incredibly high murder rate for the last year or two, and that has come down, but it's not a 50-year low in Washington, D.C. It's lower than it was last year. It's still much higher than it was in any of the years of the aughts or the 2010s.
Now, Robbie says in this particular clip, well, wait a minute, D.C., where I live, and maybe you'll live soon, saw a giant crime spike last year. So we're measuring a decrease against the crime spike, and Jessica tries to hand wave that away. She talks about also in other parts of the video that policing is not the solution. They're totally ineffective, and actually investing in education is the solution. So I thought it was really important to combine all of these claims together and assess what is actually going on in our nation's capital in the District of Columbia. So unsurprisingly, Robbie is 100% right and Jessica is 100% wrong. DC saw a dramatic decline in homicides compared to the previous year. Let's look at the numbers. So as you can see, in 2024, compared to this same period of time last year, DC saw only 91 homicides in comparison to 119. They're slightly up in rapes, up by 6, but they also saw drops in robberies by about 503 and drops in aggravated assault. And by the way, DC actually has higher robbery numbers, or had higher robbery numbers, than aggravated assault numbers, which is pretty wild. Now, according to Jessica Burbank, we need to look only at this chart right here, see DC has done much more betterer, and don't take this into account with context. But the thing is, I'm not interested in what Jessica has to say. Let's actually pull up some charts that represent the previous couple of years in the nation's capital, so you can see why Robbie is right. So this chart is absolutely amazing. And to be clear, this is a very up-to-date chart. It is from January 1st to August of this year, so it has real-time data, and it's comparing it to the same time period over the previous years. And what you'll find out is that since 2018, we've seen a significant increase in homicide all the way up to present day in terms of the long-term trend, with the most significant spike in homicide occurring in 2023 last year. So for us to talk about the decline that happened compared to this period of time in 2023, without accounting for the fact that 2023 saw an absolutely astounding increase in homicides, even in comparison to the previous years, to me is inherently dishonest and absolutely ridiculous. Now, a crime that is not put on this particular chart, but something that we have been talking about in terms of the District of Columbia spiking dramatically in the previous year, in 2023, is motor vehicle theft. And again, just like the homicides from 2023, there was an insane jump in motor vehicle theft in that same year, and there's also a significant decline, a huge percentage decline in the District of Columbia compared to this period of time in 2024, but that still shows that crime is significantly elevated in this category in terms of the long-term trend, despite that significant decline. Now, the same is true for robbery. Dramatic spike in 2023, insane numbers, and then over the same period of time this year in 2024, we get a drop down, which statistically, by the percentages, looks like a major drop, but as you can see, it is a return to an elevated point that predates the 2023 spike. Also quite notable in this robbery chart of all the things is the fact that robbery dropped during the pandemic. Robbery dropped during 2020 and spiked after that point. And if you're curious about assault, in the District of Columbia, it never really rose. Sure, there was a very tiny bump in 2020, but it has been on the decline, and it had an even sharper decline so far in 2024, so credit to where credit is due. But the fact is, this was always not about all crime rising in all places at all times. This was about specific crimes rising in specific areas and not going back to pre-Black Lives Matter riot levels. Which, by the way, we should probably take a shot in the dark at explaining why crime went up so dramatically in the District of Columbia in 2023 and why it dropped in 2024. And of course, this is not due to what Jessica Burbank suggests.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made for some of the money that's allocated to policing be allocated to crime prevention. Because the police don't have a duty to prevent crime. No, the Supreme Court has ruled time and again that no police officers have a duty to prevent crime. They only have a duty to investigate crime after it happens and to punish people upon finding them. Because there is something to be said for having your community be a positive one to live in, cleaning up graffiti if it's ugly, making sure streets are clean, planting trees so that, the pavements are not extraordinarily hot in the summertime, making life an enjoyable one to live. It has a reduction in crime, believe it or not. And so I think some of these resources should be allocated towards things like better schooling and education and community centers.
So Jessica says it's definitely not the police that are preventing the crime. It's actually been proven that investing in education ends up preventing crime. Trust her on that, guys. It's definitely 100% true. And in fact, and by the way, anytime you hear this talking point, you're talking to an absolute idiot. The police have no obligation to prevent crime, which is true. It comes from a specific court decision where somebody tried to sue a government agency for not preventing a crime. And what the court ended up ruling is you can't hold that government agency responsible for not preventing a crime from occurring. Now, of course, that government agency was actually a social worker's office, and the social worker was completely negligent in preventing the abuse of a child in that particular case, which we talked about on this channel before. And yes, that is applicable to all policing agencies of the executive branches around the country. But to be clear, that does not mean that there aren't consequences for police from the department just because you can't sue them for not preventing a crime, if you understand me. And we did a whole video on that. On top of that, that doesn't take into account that responding to crimes after they occur, arresting suspects and holding them accountable prevents them from repeat offending, which has the effect of preventing future crime. But more importantly than that, Jessica's assertion that education spending is the thing that drives down crime is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Go look at public school spending by city, and what you will find out is that the city of Baltimore is either number 3 or number 4, and they're also in the top 3 each and every year in terms of homicide. If spending on public education prevented crime, Baltimore would be the 3rd safest place in the entire country, not one of the top 3 most dangerous places in the country each and every year. But what's even funnier about Jessica Burbank's worldview and how she's using this data in order to support her is the fact that the District of Columbia did exactly what Jessica Burbank and her types tend to advocate for. Now, a lot of people will mistakenly point to the criminal justice reform bill in the District of Columbia of 2023 as the thing that indicates the big change in that particular year. But it's important to understand that that law was not set to go into effect until the year 2025. And although it was so bad in Muriel Bowser's opinion in certain regards that she actually vetoed the law and then the legislature overrid the veto, that's not actually what was causing the crime spike, in my opinion. Now, of course, there were criminal justice reform bills that played a role, but the fact of the matter is that the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia was incredibly lazy. In 2022's fiscal year, which I believe ends on September 30th, he declined to prosecute 67% of the charges that were brought to his office. So 2/3 of the people that were arrested, he just let go. That ended up dropping in 2023, to be perfectly fair, to 56%, but that is still higher than 9 of the last 10 previous years before that. So this guy is just not prosecuting over 50% of arrests. And again, that's better than 2/3, but still pretty bad. Now, what people need to understand is that criminals will typically escalate their behavior over time. In fact, one of the things that we found out and we've talked about specific to the District of Columbia is that when somebody is finally arrested for homicide, it turns out they typically have around 11 arrests previous to that, and those were opportunities in order to get that person off the streets to prevent said homicide. So Graves letting all of these people build up those arrests in 2022 and into 2023. Now, this got so bad that the Congress was going to pass a law in order to stop DC's reforms from going into effect, and this led to the District of Columbia itself passing a law that gave judges the power to hold more defendants pre-trial, and a bunch of other reforms in the opposite direction that Burbank would be against. So anybody citing the District of Columbia as an example of how crime is caused by poverty and the poverty that was afflicted upon them post-pandemic is just wrong. It's not supported by the data. In fact, a lot of crimes went down during the pandemic in the District of Columbia, and they only spiked after laws were passed to soften the criminal justice system even further. And in fact, once we saw those laws reversed, the crime spike ended up reversing according to the preliminary numbers. So the District of Columbia's 2024 crime drop, along with a bunch of these other places that see crime drops, if I were to delve into those cities specifically, prove my theory on how this works, not their theory, because they tried going softer on crime. Dramatic, record-breaking crime spikes, worse it's been in a decade, sometimes 2 decades, depending on the category. Then they reverse it, and things revert back to how they were.
I mean, I want to clean up the graffiti and all that kind of stuff too, but that entails arresting the people who do the graffiti. I mean, you say that's not crime prevention, but the idea is that those people are going to be repeat offenders, so you arrest them so that then there's no follow-up and they do it again. We can't have precognition like in Minority Report or something where we predict that people are going to commit crime. But there's a lot of, particularly the violent crime, people get arrested and you find out, they've stabbed however many other people and they just got let out back on the street again. Intervene at that level with the police and you would take care of much of the problem.
So I find it very hard to believe that investing more money in a police force that is proven to not even solve crimes, let alone prevent them, which is not their legal obligation to do. It's simply to solve crimes and catch criminals and bring them to the justice system.
It depends what it's being spent on, but here's The Atlantic. For every 10% increase in the size of the police force, violent crime rates drop by 13%. That's a study cited by The Atlantic.
Okay, I'll dig into that study. The Atlantic doesn't do studies, so...
Well, that's not a study it's a study cited by The Atlantic.
Yes, it's also the case that studies being reported by mainstream journals include information that's inaccurate.
Now, I'd left in that part because I thought it was funny because Jessica Burbank asked for some statistical evidence in order to prove that police drop crime. Robbie ends up presenting it to her, and then all of a sudden, she's not interested in statistical evidence because, spoiler alert, this is an ideologue who is never interested in engaging in a fact-based argument. And I just found that to be incredibly funny, and Robbie being frustrated on the Hill Rising is amusing to me beyond all ends because this is just what happens time and time again. He's confronted with stupid each and every time he's on the show, and he just gets flustered, and I find that to be incredibly entertaining. But my overall takeaway from this is that you guys need to examine this data yourself. When the claim goes out there, don't just go based on the headline. And by the way, if it shows that crime is dropping, and in a lot of categories, in a lot of these cities that are listed, that is the case, we should celebrate that. That's a good thing. But we should also dive deeper into the policies that were instituted and that may have been undone that possibly led to those crime drops. We should break down what categories of crime are actually dropping versus not dropping, because you might find that aggravated assault could be plunging the most, and since that was the most amount of crime, that could lead to the numbers being skewed when you're up in 3 of the other 4 major categories. It also should be understood that data can be reported in very misleading ways. Ironically, Jessica Burbank told us that as she reported data in very misleading ways. First of all, we talked about it in the open. It's not 54 of 69 major cities. It's 54 of 69 police agencies reported a crime decline. And this is often reported as a crime drop nationwide. And then this was followed up in the beginning of this segment, if you'll recall, with the league leaders in the percentage drop of criminality. We heard about Columbus, Ohio, Austin, DC, which I spent a lot of time addressing to show you how that's not legitimate. But I'll ask the question, when you see the big numbers, the 30%, the 40% of crime drops, how much do you think, or how much are you intended to believe crime dropped overall in these 69 major cities? Well, the answer to that question is 6%, but I have a feeling that when you lead with the highest, never talk about how high the spike is in those 15 police agencies reporting data, then you get a completely skewed perspective. And that's the thing. For the drop to only be 6%, those 15 police agencies had to report a dramatic increase in crime. So crime got significantly worse for those 15 locations, but you would never once get that from the reporting that's presented to us. All this is very important to understand when we're talking about crime data, but we have to also not be so rigid in our assertions that crime is up everywhere in all categories all the time, because that is just not the case. We have to actually go by the statistics. We have to examine them. We can examine data collection methods and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, we have to rely on numbers, fact-based arguments, because the left is just looking for a headline that matches their conclusion that they already have pre-written. And if you actually stick to the facts, if you actually delve into the numbers, you'll find time and time again that they don't actually support their claims, that the very things that they're citing state the exact opposite of what they're claiming it states, which is ironic because Jessica Burbank makes that claim about The Atlantic summarizing a study when she's very much doing this right now on this episode of The Hill Rising. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. And by the way, if you live in one of these major cities that reportedly have seen crime drops, I want to know if you guys are seeing that in your particular area. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about widespread reporting about a crime drop. Till next time.